Not only is Castlevania Symphony of the Night a masterpiece of video game design, it's teeming with references to history, religion, literature, and folklore. This is the Annotated Symphony of the Night. The funny thing about this location, the reverse outer wall, is that, at least as far as this video series is concerned, there's nothing new here to talk about. We'll be barreling through it to get to our next 2 stops and running into enemies that we've already found in previous episodes. So let's backpedal a little bit and talk about the Goddess Shield, found in the last episode in the tall elevator shaft swarmed with imps. It's a shield with +4 defense that is engraved with a goddess image, according to its in-game description. Each Shield Rod spell summons this unnamed deity, which looks to have visual motifs that may be South or Central American and will boost dark elemental protection. The one prominent discussion point in this area is the boss, the creature. In terms of the Castlevania series, this enemy has appeared in nearly every game under the name Frankenstein, and with similar appearances, while Symphony of the Night finally took control and gave this monster its proper name. The reasoning is simple, really. This foe was cobbled together from various body parts and brought to life by Dr. Victor Frankenstein, the scientist and the protagonist of English author Mary Shelley's seminal 1818 novel Frankenstein, or the Modern Prometheus. While the novel gives several names for this being, creature, abortion, monster, demon, and wretch among them, its audience over time has come to refer to it as simply Frankenstein, which has become an acceptable moniker. The book itself is a significant work of fiction. Not only does it have something of a famous origin, as it's the supposed product of a competition amongst other famous writers Percy Shelley, John Polidori, and Lord Byron, it's also become somewhat accepted as the first science fiction novel, though this is open to debate. Whether or not you subscribe to this claim, its influence as a piece of horror or science fiction is as far-reaching as it possibly could be, particularly in this case on film, as it was the inspiration for several adaptations beginning in the silent era with a 1910 short film produced by Thomas Edison's Edison Studios. The most famous of these adaptations, of course, and the inspiration behind the enemy's design in this and every other game in the Castlevania franchise, is the 1931 Universal film starring Boris Karloff, itself a significant work of the medium. Certainly not the first horror film of even the talkie era, as even the Bela Lugosi Dracula preceded it by several months. It was a smashing success, and one far beyond that of even Dracula, due to the more lavish production values of the film and Karloff's subtle humanity in the performance. It would prove to Universal that monster films were its bread and butter for the next few decades, and spawned an early film industry mega-franchise with Universal horror movies forming something of a loose continuity. As the first Castlevania game for the NES was something of an homage to these Golden Era horror films, the creature has a rightful place in this series. Typically, it is a large, lumbering enemy that will occasionally shoot lightning in other games of the franchise. It's certainly more nimble here in packing a giant hammer that will cause substantial damage. It defends the Tooth of Vlad relic, which boosts strength by +10. Into the Forbidden Library for a while, this location is a good detour because it's nothing but new enemies, and still a confined space like its counterpart in the first castle. We start by fighting it out with a lion, which is a slightly redrawn sprite of the Sword Lord enemy. Its librarian description is that it's a cowardly lion, and this is true in that it will wander away from you at first and attack after Alucard's back is turned. It drops a gauntlet accessory and the powerful Fist of Tulkas knuckle weapon. At an attack of +38 and defense of +5, it's the most powerful fist weapon in the game, and is the rare weapon with 2 special attacks, a flurry of punches with the sonic boom motion and an actual fireball with the fireball motion. Tulkas is, of course, a reference to Tolkien's Legendarium, as he was one of the Valar, something of a lesser angel of Middle-earth, and bore no weapon nor rode nor steed. Strong and hardy, he was slow to anger but also slow to forgive, and was known for his love of wrestling and other feats of strength. In Japan, this weapon is known as the orichalcum, which is the name of a possibly fictitious metal mentioned in several ancient writings, including those in the story of the lost continent of Atlantis. As such, it's become something of a mythic material in several works of fantasy fiction and video games. Flying around this whole area is the diminutive but very important shmoo, or Q in Japan. Aggravating maybe, but little else, the shmoo is weak and easily killed with a chance to drop a bowl of ramen. It also, however, can rarely drop maybe the best weapon in the game, the Chrysaegrim. On paper it isn't anything special, but in practice it's the Vorpal blade multiplied to excess. It will slash enemies 4 times, and while walking. As a one-handed sword, Alucard can use the offhand for a shield, or even another Chrysaegrim for double the unfair damage output. If you were to take a look at the map, you can see the Forbidden Library is fairly close to the starting location, so many players tend to bum rush into the western end of the inverted castle to grind for this weapon drop. If it wouldn't bore you to death, I'd probably do the same thing. This weapon is yet another reference to Tolkien's work, as the Chrysaegrim was a mountain range encircling Gondolin that was the home of the Great Eagles and their lord Thorndor. The Japanese name for this weapon is the Valmon Way, which, as of this video's production, has no clear meaning. Some discussion on both the Castlevania Dungeon and Bloodstained forums present evidence that it may be a word in Tolkien's fictional Quenya Elvish language, meaning blessed wind. But short of symphony producer Koji Igarashi or Toru Hagihara having their say, it might be a mystery of the game left unsolved, even though this weapon has retained the name Valmon Way in later entries in the series. The Starlight is a ring accessory that boosts the already considerable strength of the cross subweapon. Starlight itself is a mineral found in several regions of the world, including the United States and Norway, and distinctive for its cruciform-shaped crystal twining. Back to the shmoo, its name may be a reference to writer-artist Al Cap's formative comic strip Lil Abner that ran in newspapers from 1934 to 1977. The shmoo in this strip was an amorphous, ghost-like being that was benevolent and apparently very tasty when eaten. Its Japanese name Q is likewise a reference to Obake no Kutaro, Fujiko Fujio's manga about a mischievous shape-shifting spirit living amongst a family and published in 1964. The Scarecrow enemy is another easily avoided foe, as the body on the spike is the damage box and not exactly the spike itself. Curiously, it's also unencumbered by the stopwatch subweapon. There are actually 2 Scarecrow sprites, the main difference being where the spear impales the body, but both are spewing green blood from them, strangely. It drops, of course, a javelin throwing weapon, but also the Muramasa sword, which was detailed in a previous video. Its bestiary description states that it's an impaled man looking for brains, which, no pun intended, is something to keep in mind for a little bit. The Baudelaire is an interesting weapon. The sprite found in the inventory suggested it's a curved sword not unlike a scimitar, but the name is another word for the Basilard, a weapon found in the second video of the series, which was a short sword of the late Middle Ages. It could also be a reference to the 19th century macabre French poet Charles Baudelaire. His most famous work, a book of poetry called The Flowers of Evil, was published in 1857. The Japanese version names this the Scimitar of Barzai. This is also one of the few other references to horror writer H.P. Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythos in the game, as Barzai was a high priest of the Eldritch Great Ones, whom took it upon himself to scale their mountain to look upon their faces. What he found, though, was that other gods, which is the name of the short story where he appears, were there from, quote, the outer hells to guard the feeble gods of earth. It's a one-handed sword with no special attack. What makes it notable, though, is that the strength of the weapon is based on the playtime of the game, and will get stronger as the minutes and hours pass, capping at plus 99, making it one of the stronger weapons in the game from a stat perspective, though this is still outshone by various other methods of monster slaying, including the Chrysaegrim, which we could just get from the shmoo. And here we have the Tin Man enemy, which will chase Alucard down with its axe arm and pop out a machine gun after enough damage has been dealt to it. Described as a heartless Tin Man in-game, it drops a lunch A food item and the Mojo Mail. Also known as the Dark Breastplate in the Japanese version, this item is the opposite of the Brilliant Mail in that it boosts magical attacks and familiar damage by 50%, while also granting an impressive plus 15 to defense. So if you've been paying attention, you would have noticed that we fought the Lion, the Scarecrow, and the Tin Man in this Forbidden Library, making this whole place a reference to L. Frank Baum's Wonderful Wizard of Oz, published in May of 1900, and other later works in the same universe. Essentially a fantastical story of a young girl's journey into a strange land, Baum used a variety of inspirations, including famously his own personal life, as sources. Of course, Baum's work has been adapted many times over for the stage shortly after the book was published, and film beginning in the silent era. MGM's 1939 version starring Judy Garland, though underperforming in the box office at the time, has ultimately become one of the most beloved movies in the medium's history. Okay, back through the reverse outer wall on our march forward. You'll notice that the elevator sadly ceased to work in the inverted castle, and there aren't any weather effects here, minor but noticeable in its absence. Like other areas in the inverted castle, this is the very descriptive reverse clock tower. As we map through this area, let's circle back to two quick notes. First, in our fight with the creature and the doppelganger 10 before it, the portal in the background is a recreation of the Aztec calendar as caught by viewer Jip Minderman. One of the Mesoamerican calendar systems, its circular shape leads scholars to believe that it was a solar-based calendar system, and with a 52-century lifespan, which gave conspiracy theorists plenty to speculate over. And second, the Forbidden Library is a favorite place for players to grind for familiar levels, as the enemies inside, particularly the lion, give the most experience to our little friends outside of going through the trouble of the duplicator method shown in the anti-chapel video. The Dragon Helm is yet another item stolen from Alucard by Death at the beginning of the game. It boosts strength by +4 and defense by +3, but is notable for, quote, frightening enemies according to its inventory description, which lowers their defense by 50%, making it very useful for melee-focused players. In Japan, it's named Egil's Helmet, which is a reference to a few Old Norse and Germanic heroes, such as the archer Agilaz and Swedish king Ongendale. It might go without saying at this point that this could also be a reference to the dragon helm of Dora Loman, also known as the Helm of Hador from Tolkien's Silmarillion. The sword Luminous has no special attack but boosts damage by +26. Its in-game description states that it's a sword forged by elves, which makes sense given its name in the Japanese version is Orcrist. This is the name of the sword found in the Troll Hoard by the titular hobbit Bilbo Baggins in Tolkien's first published fantasy novel. Also known as the Goblin Cleaver, it was kept and wielded by Thorin Oakenshield and buried with him after the Battle of Five Armies. As elvish swords would glow when orcs were near, this probably lends to the weapon's name in the North American version as, quote, luminous is short for luminescence, which is the emission of light by a substance not resulting from heat, and according to its Wikipedia entry is a form of cold body radiation. Other than the gear puzzles that's a reflection of what we found in the first castle, there isn't a whole lot of new things to discuss here, so we're going to drop through it pretty quickly. The Medusa Heads and the Cloaked Knight are certainly a nuisance, but we don't need to deal with them, so we just won't. The Sunstone accessory is a necklace that boosts strength, constitution, intelligence, and luck by +5, quote, after sunrise. This makes it the inverse of the Moonstone that we found in the first castle, as its benefits are tied to the in-game clock. Since we found with the latter accessory that the game perceives that you began your adventure at midnight, the Sunstone's effects won't occur until you are 6 hours into the game, and will revert back to sunset 12 hours later. Again, like the Moonstone, this was changed in the Saturn version to align with the internal clock of the console. This area is curious because it will continuously respawn the Cloaked Knight here when you leave the screen and come back. Next to no other places in the game do this. The spike traps falling from the ceiling are recurring hazards from the series, and they came from the second level of the first game. They've crept up intermittently as the franchise has gone on. The Bomb Knight, or Bomb Armor, is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. It drops one-time projectiles TNT and dynamite, and its bombs can be ricocheted back to it. The Moon Rod is the strongest cudgel in the game at +17 to attack. Its main use comes from the summoned projectiles that can be executed with a fireball motion at the expense of a little bit of magic. The Castlevania wiki from fandom.com notes that it may be a reference to the first season of the Sailor Moon anime, where the title character performs the moon healing escalation, but is soon lost afterward. This is the Darkwing Bat, which is the ancestral first boss of the whole franchise. It's also a recurring enemy as it has appeared in almost every entry into the series, but typically early in each game. Perhaps as something of a nod to its early boss status, the one in this game is one of the more easily defeated major enemies, making the Ring of Vlad that it defends a relatively simple endeavor. The ring is another relic that's a key to finishing the game. It boosts intelligence by +10. After 3 areas of the castle and 2 bosses, this is a fine place to end the episode. Join us next time for a trip into the upper underground. See you then.